Remember when backing up our data was like the ultimate safety net? Just grab an external hard drive, copy some files, and boom, you're good.
Yeah, simpler times, right?
Well, not so much anymore. Today, we're diving deep into data resilience, and honestly, the cyber landscape out there is starting to feel, well, hostile is the word that comes to mind.
It's true. The sources you sent over, it's a pretty intense picture they paint. I mean, forgetting someone just like crashing your computer. We're talking attackers who go after the backups themselves, the recovery stuff, like the core of data resilience.
So they're not even after your files. They want to make sure you can't get them back. I mean, that's a whole other level. So what exactly are we looking at today?
We're going to break down how these attacks have actually changed, how cybersecurity is trying to keep up, and the big thing, how to get ahead of it all, be more proactive. And we'll dig into some of the interesting stuff from the research, like dwell time.
A well time.
Yeah, the time between, when a system is breached and when the attack really hits. And get this, there are tools that can spot threats before they even become attacks.
Like a minority report for our
Yeah.
data. I am definitely intrigued. Let's get into it. What did you see as like the biggest change in how these cyber threats are working?
It's that shift. Like before it was about those frontline systems, now they're going right for the backups. Think about it. Someone wants to disrupt your business. Sure, they'll hit the website, mess with your email. But if they're going to extort you, make it so you can't recover, they're aiming for the backups where your important data is supposed to be safe. That's where they get real control.
Okay, so how are they getting, is it like brute force just hacking away, or is it sneakier than that?
It's a mix, actually. The sources talk about everything from finding those little software weaknesses, flaws in the code, to like really clever phishing schemes to trick people into giving up passwords. And the scary part is once they're in, they might just wait.
Which brings us to that dwell time, right? You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, one source, they had this ransomware attack. Attackers were in the system for, get this, almost 9 months before they did anything.
9 months.
9 months. They were just scoping things out, mapping the backups, figuring out how to do the most damage.
I mean, that just throws the old detect and respond idea right out the window. By the time you see something, it's already too late.
Exactly why those sources are all about the proactive stuff. What if, during those 9 months, they had something, a tool, always scanning, looking for anything unusual, flagging things before they blew up? That's the kind of change we need.
So instead of waiting for the alarm to go off, we're like constantly watching for anything out of place. What does that even look like practically?
It's not just, looking at firewall logs or what your antivirus says. These new technologies, they go deeper. They're checking network traffic patterns, how people are using the system, even if they're trying to sneak out tiny bits of data, stuff that normally go unnoticed.
Okay, yeah, I'm seeing the minority report thing now.
Mm-hmm.
We're not reacting. We're trying to predict based on like behavior clues.
Precisely. One source, they used this analogy of a cybersecurity detective always working the case, right? Looking for clues that something's about to go down. Could be anything, like a spike in network activity at a weird time, or someone suddenly looking at files they never touched.
So we're not waiting for them to trip the alarm. We're seeing their footsteps, their planning, and that tells us something's off.
Exactly. Shifting from reaction to action, making it way harder for them to operate in the shadows. And that's where these data protection platforms come in.
Let's talk about those. One source mentioned this platform that not only scans for threats, but it's got this whole database of incident data, like fingerprints for cybercrime. What's that about?
It's really fascinating. These platforms, they're not just working on their own. They're tied into this huge growing pool of information about past attacks, malware, weaknesses that are out there. It's like a global library of cybercrime knowledge that keeps getting updated.
So it's not just, hey, this file looks weird. It's comparing what it sees in your systems to this massive record of what bad guys have done before, right?
Exactly. It's context, seeing the bigger picture. Think about it. A regular antivirus, it might flag a file as maybe malicious because it looks kind of like known malware.
Kind of like, this guy's wearing a black hoodie, might be up to no good.
Right. But with this database, the platform goes further. It'll see how that file acts. Is it talking to known bad servers? Is it doing what malware usually does? It's more like, yeah, he's got the hoodie, but he's also carrying a crowbar and trying to pick your neighbor's lock.
Okay, yeah, that makes the threat assessment way more like accurate. It's not just yes or no, it's thinking about it. What else was interesting about these platforms?
How much they can cover. One source, they were big on scanning not just your active stuff, but backups, archives, everything. Because, like we said, the attackers are going after those specifically to make recovery harder.
It's like securing not just the front door, but the back, the windows, the basement, everything, multiple layers.
Exactly. These platforms are about seeing your whole data landscape, not just a piece of it. That's crucial for true resilience.
So we're going from just trying to protect our data to understanding what's out to get it, anticipating it.
That's a really good way to put it, and that mindset shift, that's the most important thing here, I think.
This has been really insightful, but I'm sure our listeners are thinking, okay, how do we do this? How do you implement all this proactive stuff?
That's the key question, and that leads us right into what we'll talk about next. So, before we were talking about how data resilience isn't just about protecting data anymore, it's about understanding, like anticipating those threats out there.
Right. And I bet a lot of folks listening are like, okay, great, but how do we do that? What are the actual steps to take?
Let's get practical then. The sources you gave me, they pointed to a few key things. One that really stood out was the idea of comprehensive service offerings. It's not just buying some software and hoping for the best.
So more like having a whole team experts guiding you through it all.
Exactly. Think about building a house. You could DIY, but it's smarter to have an architect, a contractor, maybe even a decorator, right? To get it right, make it solid. These services, they bring that same thinking to cybersecurity.
Okay, so what does that look like? What are these services?
They talked about everything from the initial design, figuring out your risks, to ongoing help, setting it up, even training your people. It's about a security strategy made for you, your needs, your specific risks.
So not one size fits all. It's about knowing your weaknesses
Yeah.
and building a defense for that.
Exactly. And one thing they kept bringing up was regular security assessments, like a checkup for your IT systems, right?
Yeah.
Finding weak spots, testing how strong you are, making sure everything's up to date.
And employee training is a big part of that too, right? Because best tech in the world, but people can still mess things up.
Oh, absolutely. All the firewalls, intrusion protection, all that means nothing if someone clicks a bad link and gives away their password.
So how do these service things handle that human part?
Usually they've got ongoing training programs, keeping people up to date on what the latest threats are, how to be safe, like spotting those phishing scams, having good passwords, knowing when to report something fishy.
So it's making employees part of the security, not just like bystanders who can accidentally break it.
Exactly. And it's not just teaching them, it's testing them too. Some of these services, they do fake phishing attacks to see who's paying attention and where more training is needed.
Like those fire drills we had in school, making sure everyone knows what to do if things go bad.
That's a great analogy because in cybersecurity, being prepared is everything.
Okay, so these services are one piece.
Yeah.
What else did the sources say is important for resilience?
Something we touched on, but sharing real-world intelligence, that's huge.
I'm curious about that. The idea sounds great, everyone working together, sharing info about threats. But practically, how does that work? How do you share sensitive stuff without making yourself vulnerable?
That's where those trusted partnerships come in, and secure platforms. There are groups, organizations that make the sharing happen. It's a safe way for companies to swap info about threats anonymously.
So like a secret support group for cybersecurity folks,
Yeah.
right? Talking about their problems, learning from each other.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just swapping stories. These platforms, they'll have detailed reports on threats, malware analysis, even real-time alerts about new stuff popping up. It's like a worldwide network of experts all protecting each other.
I can see how that'd be super valuable. But let's be real, no system's perfect. Even if you're proactive, something could still get through. What then?
You're right, and that's where those incident response teams come in. It's not just stopping attacks, it's having a plan for when they happen, which they probably will.
Like having a fire extinguisher ready just in case that smoke alarm goes off.
Exactly, and just like you wouldn't try to fight a fire yourself without knowing what you're doing, you don't want to handle a cyber attack alone.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what's the role of these incident response people in all this?
Those are the folks you call when things go south. They're the pros at handling all these incidents, ransomware, data breaches, the complex stuff.
Like the special forces of cybersecurity.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. They know how to assess the situation fast, contain the damage, figure out how to get your data back and your systems running again, ASAP.
Because in these attacks, time is the enemy, right? The longer it takes to stop it, the worse it gets for your business.
Absolutely. And these teams, they don't just handle the technical stuff. It's the legal side, the rules, your reputation. They can talk to the police, tell the people who are affected, even handle the PR, how it looks to the public.
So they're not just firefighters, they're investigators, they negotiate, they're even like PR people.
Exactly. They're essential for any company that's serious about resilience.
Okay, so we got the picture starting to form here. These comprehensive services, that's the foundation. Sharing intelligence keeps you ahead of the curve. And these incident response teams, they're there for when things inevitably go wrong. But there's got to be more, right?
Yeah.
What ties it all together?
You're right, there is. The last piece is those advanced data protection platforms.
Ah, yes, our digital detectives, right. The ones with all that threat info and the ability to see those subtle signs that something's wrong.
That's the one. These platforms, they're the tech backbone of your whole strategy.
Remind me, how do they use AI and all that to find and stop threats? It's getting pretty sci-fi sounding.
It might sound futuristic, but it's happening right now. These platforms go way beyond your typical antivirus. They use machine learning algorithms to look at tons of data, looking for patterns, things that are out of place.
So instead of just looking for known bad stuff, they're looking for anything that's not normal.
Exactly. They're checking network traffic, how people are acting, what files are being accessed, system settings, anything that might be a sign. And they're always learning, adapting so they can spot new threats, things traditional security would miss.
So they're not just reacting, they're searching for the unknown too.
Exactly, like having a bloodhound sniffing out trouble before it even really starts.
Okay, that's powerful. But how do they actually stop those threats? Just an alert, then it's up to you.
Some are like that, but the really good ones, they can take action automatically. Blocking bad traffic, quarantining files that are infected, even shutting down a system to stop the attack from spreading.
So they're not just watchdogs, they're guard dogs too.
Great analogy. And the best part is they're constantly getting smarter, better at spotting and dealing with threats.
This is all impressive, but it sounds complex too. I doubt most companies have the people to manage this all in-house.
You're right. That's why those comprehensive services are so important. They give you the experts, the support to make these platforms work for you.
Okay, so it's tech A&D, human expertise working together.
Exactly. And there's one more thing. Can't forget the human side.
Right. We talked about training, but there's more to it than that.
It's not just teaching people to avoid threats. It's making a culture of security throughout the whole company, making it everyone's job, not just the IT folks.
So like everyone's thinking about security all the time, even in their normal work.
Right. People should feel like they can report anything suspicious, ask questions about security rules, be proactive about protecting data.
That's a big ask. How do you even start doing that?
It starts at the top. If the leaders are serious about security, everyone else will be too. They have to show it's a priority, invest in the resources, the training.
So it's walking the walk, not just talking about it.
Absolutely. And it never ends. You got to keep reminding people, train them, celebrate when things go right.
This has been great, learning about all the pieces of data resilience. But before we move on, anything else our listeners should be thinking about?
Yeah, one thing to remember, resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about being stronger after an attack, more prepared for the next one.
Right, it's not just bouncing back, it's bouncing forward.
Exactly. And by doing what we talked about, companies can go from being victims to defenders. They can create that security culture, get ahead of threats, and know what to do when things go wrong.
And by doing that, they're not just protecting themselves, they're making the whole digital world safer for everyone.
Well said.
This has been an incredibly insightful discussion about the essential elements of building data resilience in today's complex threat landscape. But before we move on to our final takeaways, is there anything else you think our listeners should keep in mind?
Yes, I think it's important to emphasize that data resilience is not just about surviving attacks. It's about emerging stronger and more prepared for the next one.
That's a great point. It's not just about bouncing back, it's about bouncing forward.
Exactly. And by embracing the strategies and technologies we've discussed today, organizations can transform themselves from passive victims into active defenders. They can create a culture of security awareness, proactively anticipate threats, and respond effectively when those inevitable incidents occur.
And in doing so, they can not only protect their own data, but also contribute to a safer and more resilient digital world for everyone.
Well said.
All right, folks, we've covered a lot of ground today. Let's take a moment to recap those key takeaways so you can start putting these ideas into action right away. All right, folks, we've covered a lot of ground today. Let's take a moment to recap those key takeaways so you can start putting these ideas into action right away.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Well, for me, the biggest thing that keeps coming up is this whole mindset shift. We can't just set it and forget it anymore. Cybersecurity, it's got to be proactive, always evolving.
Yeah, it's like you're never really done, always learning, always adapting to stay ahead of those threats.
Right, and realizing that we can't do it all alone. Those sources, they were really big on collaboration, whether it's those comprehensive services, working with the experts, or tapping into those intelligence sharing networks. What was it, like the cybersecurity support group?
Yeah. And it's not just about reading reports, it's about actually talking to people who've been in the trenches, who've dealt with these attacks firsthand.
Speaking of which, one of the sources mentioned organizations actually participating in, like analysis sessions, not just passively reading reports. What's the advantage of that?
Well, a report can tell you about a specific malware, right? But a real analysis session with the folks who've actually fought that malware, that's where the real gold is. They'll tell you what worked, what didn't, what to watch out for, stuff that might not be in the report.
Oh, so it's like reading a textbook about firefighting versus actually talking to a firefighter who's been in a burning building. You get the real deal.
Exactly. That firsthand experience is invaluable.
Okay, so we've got the mindset shift, proactive, collaborative, and always learning. What else should folks be thinking about?
Technology. Got to invest in the right tools. We talked a lot about those data protection platforms, and the one thing that really struck me was they can analyze not just the technical data, but also how people are behaving.
You mean they can tell if someone's acting suspicious, even if they haven't actually broken any rules, like a sixth sense for cybersecurity?
Exactly. One source, they gave this example of a platform that caught a potential insider threat because, get this, an employee started looking at files they had no business looking at. Hadn't even tried to download or steal anything yet, but the platform flagged it as risky.
So it's all about spotting those subtle signs, connecting the dots, catching things a human might miss. Pretty impressive.
And it's all thanks to AI and machine learning. These platforms are constantly evolving, getting better at detecting threats.
But even with the best tech, we still have to deal with the human element.
Well, absolutely. Technology is a tool, right? And a tool is only as good as the person using it. That's why all those comprehensive service offerings, they focus so much on employee training, building that security culture.
And that training has to go beyond the basics, right? It's not just don't click on that link.
Yeah.
It's got to be more engaging, more in depth.
You're right. One source even talked about using games to make security training more fun.
Like escape rooms or capture the flag. But for cybersecurity?
Yeah, exactly. Make it something people actually enjoy, not just another box to check.
So we're not just building technical defenses, we're building a human firewall too. That's a powerful image.
And the more we invest in our people, the stronger that firewall becomes.
So as we wrap up today's deep dive, let's leave our listeners with a challenge. Given everything we've discussed, what's one action you can take this week to boost your organization's cybersecurity?
It could be anything. Start a conversation with your team about security, maybe look into those comprehensive service offerings, or even just spend 15 minutes learning about the latest phishing tricks. Every step, no matter how small, makes a difference.
And that's what this is all about, right? Not just surviving, but thriving in this ever-changing landscape.
Exactly. Data resilience, it's a journey, not a destination. And if we're proactive, invest in the right resources, and empower our people, we can all make the digital world a safer place.
Well said. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and stay vigilant out there.